Hi, I'm Natasha Sinyanovich, and this is Women Like Sex, a myth-busting podcast that examines the many, many medical, scientific, and social facts about female sexuality that were never, in fact, facts. Especially the very modern-day belief that women don't like sex as much as men do. I'll be speaking with experts, educators, friends, comedians, and more across a spectrum of ages, genders, and cultures to flip the scripts on myths and misconceptions that have long been dictated by not women. Together, we'll replace so much inaccurate messaging with healthier, smarter, factual facts and get the sex ed we wished we'd gotten. This episode is also dedicated to the clitoris, specifically how it lies at the very core of the orgasm gap. That's the significant disparity in orgasm frequency between hetero men and women, and lesbians and straight women for that matter. This gap leaves so many women feeling broken and is so often attributed to the, quote, elusive female orgasm, which is not elusive. What does keep eluding us is a better, less penis-centric definition of sex. You'll hear why from this week's guest, who has really helped popularize the phrase orgasm gap, and she explains the reasons behind it, which include silly, outdated notions of human anatomy that we still can't shake. Dr. Laurie Mintz is an emeritus professor at the University of Florida, where every year she teaches hundreds of undergraduates the psychology of human sexuality. She's published over 60 academic works and 2 books, Becoming Cliterate and A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex. She's also a practicing psychologist and sex therapist and had, as you'll hear, a wonderfully funny mother who did not embarrass easily. A longer biography and a transcript of our conversation is on the episodes page of womenlikesex.com, episode 2. Just a bit of context, we briefly mention the 20th century sexologists Alfred Kinsey, William Masters, and Virginia Johnson. For those who don't know them, they're still considered revolutionary for challenging our understanding of human sexuality. But as Laurie points out, they too were products of their time, like every single one of us humans. And with that, let's begin. I am really excited to talk to you. You are among the rock stars of this space.
Oh, that's so kind. That's quite a compliment. Thank you. Thank you.
I wanted to start by clarifying that we will not be using the terms sex and intercourse interchangeably.
Thank you. We have to understand that 96% of women need clitoral stimulation to experience orgasm, and only about 4% of women say that intercourse alone is their most reliable route to orgasm. So when we use the words intercourse and sex as if they're one and the same, we are overvaluing men's most reliable route to orgasm. We are undervaluing women's most reliable route to orgasm. And to put this in context, if we overvalued women's orgasms the way we overvalue men's orgasms, we would call foreplay, another word I don't use, sex, and intercourse postplay. And I'm not suggesting we do that, but I'm suggesting we equally value women and men's most reliable route to orgasm. So sex is the whole of an encounter, and then everything else, let's just use words. Penis and vagina sex, oral sex, manual stimulation, vibrator stimulation. There's no need to name one act as the premier act.
And this is due to, right, long-held, and I use heavy air quotes, like scientific and medical definitions and formula for sex, which is P and V, penis and vagina, and those crazy charts. The line that goes up for stimulation and then immediately drops down after ejaculation. They'd be silly if they haven't been doing damage for so long.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you are talking about heterosex between cis men and cis women, it makes it seem like that's the main event. And everything else, if you can get to it and if you can have it, it's this little appetizer that you may or may not need.
And it has so many women feeling broken, has so many women experiencing sexual pain because they rushed to penetration without being aroused. I mean, I think that belief in that use of that word and images that show, false images that that's both women and men's most reliable route has caused women a lot of harm. So I'm so glad you started us off that way of redefining those terms.
That's one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you, because you are at the forefront of redefining the actual words, the actual terminology that we use. And as a journalist, I know that words are everything. Well, of the direct communication that we have with one another, there's the indirect, right? There's everything that happens beneath the words, around the words. But with my students and in newsrooms, I have created a loaded language list so we can stop using words that betray all of this unconscious bias, that keep perpetuating visions of the world and of ourselves that just aren't true.
Yes, unconscious bias. That is exactly what we're talking about. And this language reflects culture and it perpetuates culture. And we need to stop perpetuating a culture that devalues women's sexuality.
That leads to the orgasm gap that you teach about. Can you explain the orgasm gap?
Yes. There's been so many studies now, and someone actually just came out with a 30-year review of all the studies. So this isn't new science, but what it is the consistent finding now we know across 30 years in the scientific literature that when cisgender women, so women assigned a sex of female at birth who still identify as a woman, get it on with cisgender men, the women are having substantially fewer orgasms than men. And I could pull, any stat out because there's so many, but the ones I'll give are that in relationship sex, it's about 85% of men say they always orgasm versus 65%. In hookup sex, it's 55% of men versus 10% of women. So it's huge, huge in hookup sex. And I may be getting ahead of myself with your questions, so I'll stop because I get real fired up when I talk about this.
It's all interconnected anyway.
Thank you. Some people say, well, of course, women's orgasms are elusive. It's biology. But we know it's not biology because when women masturbate, 95% reach orgasm easily and within 4 minutes, same as with men. And when women get it on with other women, they're having more orgasms. My favorite study, it was a teeny study, but it was bisexual women who hooked up with women and men. So same woman, same body. And when their first time hookup partner was a woman, they orgasmed 64% of the time. With a man, 7% of the time.
Wow. I mean, I shouldn't say wow. It doesn't surprise me because of how we frame sex, because of how we think of sex. And I like that you use that word elusive. I say that with a huge grain of salt because I don't like any of this. This is tragic comic, I often say, and comic only because we have to laugh otherwise, because the tragedy behind it is huge of just women's has a larger connotations of women's roles in society, just women's knowledge of their own bodies. I didn't know until I read your book that I was among the relatively few women who could orgasm during intercourse. I thought, oh, that's how I can come. And also this other way, literally, as opposed to the other way around. I come the way that most women come, and I can also do it this other way.
I know you're interviewing me, but this raises a really interesting question for me, if you don't mind. I've been recently thinking about the fact that, yeah, I mean, there are women who orgasm from penetration, and I certainly don't want to devalue any woman's way of orgasming. The reason I'm bringing attention to clitoral stimulation is because women think they should do it that way, and those women feel broken. And I've recently been thinking about all the women who write me, come to my private office, my students. They're all ones who come from clitoral stimulation. No woman has ever sought my help saying, "What's wrong with me? I can orgasm from penetration."
Oh, that says everything.
Right? Before you read the book, I'm guessing you weren't one of the many women who felt broken because you could see yourself in the media, in the images. But maybe I'm wrong there.
Yeah, no, I never thought of it that way. Yes, I saw myself reflected. I used to be a film reporter, so I spent a lot of time watching a lot of movies. I did that for about 15 years when I lived in Italy.
Wow.
Apart from, yeah, watching these movies in which movie time is condensed time, screen time is condensed time. So, like that love scene, that or sex scene takes place in intercourse scene in 30 seconds, right?
Yeah.
I knew that was BS, but Still, I knew what society expected me to be. And one of the reasons, and Sir Alexandra Solomon, who I know that you know,
Yeah.
she was one of the inspirations for this. I was listening to NPR and driving to my NPR job in Nashville, and she was being interviewed on the 1A, on that program 1A, and talking about how she teaches a sex and dating class at Northwestern. And when asked the number one question she gets, she said, well, it's for my female students asking what's wrong with me because I like sex and I want sex more than my boyfriend, my male partners. And I screamed in the car because these were young women who could be my daughters. And I thought, here it is. Well into the 21st century, women are still pathologizing themselves. The knee-jerk reaction is still to say, what's wrong with me, instead of what's wrong with all of the messaging that I've gotten. And whether that messaging came from home as well as society. We're still teaching sexuality in ways that to be male is to be hypersexual, to be female is to not even admit to liking it. Or maybe to liking it with one partner at a time, right? Like with your partner, preferably married.
Oh, I love the way you said that is, still to this day, I hear so much about what's wrong with me, not what's wrong with the messages that I was indoctrinated with. Because of course, people hear this when they're young. It's like, of course, you believe what, your parents, your grandparents, your religious institution teaches you. And so many of the students in my class, like they say to me, like, you're the first adult that's ever even told me like sex should be fun. Sex should be pleasurable. I do a lot of surveys with my students, and that's where I got a lot of the data from my book. And one of the questions I ask is, did your sex ed, prepare you to have pleasurable sex, or did anyone? And maybe 1% say, yeah, someone along the way told me sex is supposed to be pleasurable. And in fact, women are getting the message still from their mothers, oh, and I'm talking about sex in general, but the message they're getting is sex as intercourse is painful. It's just something we all put up with.
Yeah, the sort of spectrum of the bad messaging is it's physically painful all the way to emotionally traumatic because we are equating by saying that males want sex all the time. We perpetuate the boys will be boys stereotypes, and we perpetuate this idea that boys will want it and men will want it all the time. They may just have to take it. And if girls and women don't want it that much, then, what can you do? Because these are just these natural urges and that's not, and women have the same natural urges. And you should not be equating sex with crime, sex with pain and trauma and crime. That's not.
Sex, I always tell my students, if it was violent or coerced, that's not sex. That's a form of violence and coercion, period. And that's another language issue. I tell my students, it's sexual violence, it's sexual coercion. There's not such a thing as coercive sex, because that makes it sound like if it's not enthusiastically consented to, it's not sex.
Laws are changing slowly, so very slowly, but more people are recognizing that if it is coercion, it's not sex.
Right.
This is not me telling everyone who's ever been coerced into sex to go and report it because that's a whole other discussion. And you just made me think of once you start seeing and understanding how skewed everything is, right? You can't and shouldn't unsee it. But it's like every time a door or a window opens, even more do. And I was thinking of your TEDx talk when you point out how male masturbation resembles intercourse.
Right.
You use the kind of standard jack off motion, for lack of a better word. And while female masturbation doesn't look like that, and you mime, with the circular motion with your fingers. And I was struck for two reasons. One is what we're talking about, like the formula that everybody has been operating from what intercourse should be. But again, because of how never ending, right? It seems never ending. All of this skewed messaging, just so many ideas that we have deeply implanted in our minds and in our souls of what sex should be.
And it makes sex really bad for most people. Not exciting, not orgasmic, painful. Men are affected by it too, feeling pressure that they need to last long, thrust hard. These messages are very harmful. And, you know, we've talked a lot about language, so it just pops in my head. I want to point out, and I do in my TED Talk too, and in my book, and it's super important to me that we also erase women's pleasure when we call all of our genitals a vagina. Because the vagina is, as you well know, the canal where penises and dildos can go in and babies can come out. But since we already established most women don't orgasm that way, we are and they need external stimulation of what's called the vulva. That's the external area. We are linguistically erasing our own pleasure and calling our genitals by the part that's more useful to men than to women themselves.
Exactly. I mean, that's another thing where I think it was when I started this project that I started calling the genitalia by the proper name. It was light bulb moment after light bulb moment when I thought of that socially, and also then when I thought of that physiologically. I've been biopsied without any anesthesia. I felt a little tug, which was, I guess, when the doctor snipped something, right? That's not where my pleasure is. If I can't even feel, and I don't need to be anesthetized, if somebody's going to be removing a little piece of tissue.
Yeah, exactly. There are no touch sensitive nerve endings in the inner two-thirds of the vagina. They're pressure sensitive. So hence explaining why you could have that and feel just a little tug, you know? But if it was, heaven forbid, on your vulva, you'd be screaming in pain.
That makes me think of another long held myth of clitoral versus vaginal orgasms. And Freud, I mean, we know that Freud got a lot of things wrong when it came to women, but this idea of immature versus mature orgasms, I remember reading that a long time ago, coming across the terms and thinking, oh, I wonder if he's referring to immature orgasm because it was a study on children's sexual awakenings. And no.
All this stuff was in the culture already, and the devaluing of women's sexuality and the lack of clitoral knowledge. But he really kind of put the nail in the coffin for us, if you will. He actually went so far to say when a girl matures, she will transfer sensitivity from her clitoris to her vagina. That is so ridiculous. It's like saying, when you grow up, you won't breathe through your nose anymore. You'll be able to do it from your ear. As if we changed our organs functioning, you know, what it actually did as we got older. It's just so ludicrous, and it's still with us today, this idea of vaginal versus clitoral orgasms. And, you know, the scientific community still debates it, you know, and what it does is it set up this hierarchy. When you were saying earlier that you can orgasm from vaginal stimulation, that's like the way I like to say it, not vaginal orgasms or clitoral. What type of stimulation, right? I was giving a talk once. The woman who was interviewing me said, clap your hands if you need clitoral stimulation. It was like loud. And then she said, clap your hands if you can orgasm from penetration. You could hardly hear it. And this was a lovely woman, very feminist, very smart. Nothing against her except the deeply ingrained health. She said, lucky, lucky, I envy you. And I was like, oh my goodness, we're like another way we perpetuate it, the lucky ones.
But I do remember reading studies that even vaginal orgasms are really clitoral. It just depends on the position because not every woman's clitoris will be stimulated during intercourse.
And it's been replicated in science, but there's a lot of reasons biologically that some women can orgasm from vaginal stimulation. And what you're talking about is the rule of thumb that for some people, and those are usually those with like an inch or less between their clitoris, and they measure it to the urethral opening, not the vaginal opening, but the motion of the penis going in and out of the vagina will pull on the inner lips enough. I should have gotten my vulva puppet out. I could show you, and that it will tug on the inner lips, which will tug on the clitoral hood, basically. So that involves clitoral stimulation. The other reason some folks might orgasm from the penis and the vagina is because the clitoris is a vast internal organ, and its bulbs surround the vagina. So it's like hugging it. But I love what Cher Hite said about this, who wrote the Hite Report in the 70s. She was like run out of town basically for saying the same thing I said, like, 20 some years later. I thought maybe I'd be run out of town, but I wasn't. I did get some hate mail. But what she said is, okay, if you want to move your ears, you can do so by moving your cheeks. Your ears move, or you can move your cheeks by moving your ears. I don't remember the order. But if you really, really, really want to move those parts, why don't you just tug them directly? I just love that metaphor in her book.
Tugging them directly goes back to sexual freedom and sexual agency and knowledge. And I recommend to everyone to read your book because apart from talking about the larger social implications, you also have how-tos.
Yeah, it's a combination of cultural analysis and self-help to close the orgasm gap. It's both, basically.
Speaking about macro issues, there's a line from your book that I wrote down, or sorry, a passage that goes, women's main focus still today is to be sexually desirable to others rather than their own sexual desire. This places women's emphasis on how they look rather than how they feel. Even worse, some women and men will think that a woman's main role sexually is to please the man. When I read that years ago, I started thinking about all the ways that what women do to their bodies to please men. And it's not that it doesn't occur the other way, but just in terms of sexuality and genitalia. And I started asking male friends, those especially who said that they really liked a shaved vulva, that they don't like really a lot of pubic hair. So I started asking, well, what would it take you to shave your testicles, your genitalia? And none of them said, well, nothing. I would do it if, my girlfriend or my partner, if women started liking that. They all had answers that were like, well, if I was dating a really wealthy woman who would fly me out to an island and, shower me with gifts and money or something, and if she also wanted that, okay. It was this transactional thing, but the bar was pretty high for what they would do. And I was like, well, what you're describing for you is like a Tuesday for a woman. Women are constantly being told that their vulvas need to look this way or that way and are spending a lot of time, a lot of effort and pain to be desirable. As opposed to asking, and this is something that when I was younger and didn't wear makeup, or didn't like wearing high heels, people tell me, well, you're never going to get a guy that way. I was like, but I don't want a man who wants a woman who wears a lot of makeup and high heels. So it works both ways. And if we teach women to think about their own sexual pleasure, then you ask, well, what do I want? I mean, and this isn't exclusive just to heterosexual couples or heterosexual intercourse or sex, just heterosexual sex. But what do I want from that other person?
It's so interesting. And I don't get into the pubic hair issue in my book a lot, but I do talk about it, except for in the appendix where I talk about what doctors say, which is not to shave or wax it all the pubic hair off. But I do teach it in my class. And, I hear stories of women like waxing, shaving before they go out, running home before a hookup, injuries. And it's interesting to me because it's I do a lot of like pre-post polling in my class, right? Like, okay, here's what the vulva, why you should call it this. Now, what words are you going to use? Like, has my lecture changed your mind? And 90% of the time, 98% of the time, it's a yes for most of them. Oh my gosh, I didn't know this. Now I'm going to change my behavior. Shaving and waxing is one where no change rarely happens. It's so deeply ingrained.
Mm-hmm.
The answer to that is, yeah, now I know that it's not medically, healthy as trimming, for example, having a little hair, but I'm still going to do it because what guys like. It's as deeply ingrained as diet culture, really, that we need to change our body's natural way of being to please men. At least I'm able to intervene with those women who were thinking of getting a labiaplasty. That at least I'm able to intervene with, I think, when I explain, like, you're cutting off sexually responsive tissue, you know? So anyway, it's quite deeply ingrained, this notion that we must change our bodies for men, even if it's harmful for us.
Yeah, and it changes generationally. It was not something that I dealt with as a young woman. I take that back. It had definitely started, but I avoid any kind of pain unless it's medically necessary. I don't like to suffer. I remember my friends starting to do it and do the little landing strip. And I remember even then asking them, I was like, well, why do you want a guy who wants your, sure, I said vagina at the time, but who just wants you to look like a 12-year-old? It always creeped me out because it's like, I don't want my vulva to look like it did before I hit puberty.
Right.
That's what I equated it with. Apart from the pain aversion, I don't want a man who's fully shaved because I don't want a man who looks like he's 12 either.
Yeah, and some writings have equated the rise in child pornography in this fashion, but it's another fashion for women's bodies, and now women believe they feel cleaner, they are cleaner. It's another myth, and yeah, I'm very pain averse too. I will confess I get my eyebrows waxed, and I have spoken to the person who does it many times because I'm like, "Ow, why am I doing this? This hurts so bad," you know? And I've talked to her about how much it must hurt to do the same thing to our vulva, and she's like, "Oh yeah, there's people are screaming in pain."
Oh, I tried waxing my legs. I don't know. I don't even know how old I was. And that lasted, yeah, maybe twice. Because also when I found out that I had to live with stubble for a long time until it grew out long enough to wax again, I was like, oh, this sucks. I can just freaking just shave.
Right, it's another discomfort you didn't wanna experience.
I want to jump back for a second to when we were talking about Freud. Before I forget, it is important for me that this is a myth busting show. And I want to help educate people, myself first and foremost, and others on just how much we have been working off of these myths. And I didn't know until I had read your work that even the Kinsey report, which was pretty radical for its time in the US at least, and Masters and Johnson were also very, very skewed in their way of thinking. That I think you wrote Kinsey thought that women, when they were married long enough, then they could experience orgasm through intercourse, even though he had acknowledged and said and written about how important the clitoris was and clitoral stimulation, orgasm, and something I didn't know that Masters and Johnson had only selected women who could come during intercourse.
Yeah. So even the science we have thought we were relying on was skewed. Yeah, I was blown away when when I was like redoing the research for the history chapter. I mean, I was just myself blown away by that when I found it. I wasn't going to take someone else's words. I literally got out their books and I found the description of the study in Masters and Johnson's book. And there it was in, black and white. This is how we selected subjects. They were a product of their time as well.
Yeah. And social science in particular needs to be contextualized always. I mean, I come from my dad's a physicist, my stepdad's a physicist, and I know they bristle when you call anything in social science. And medicine as well. Yeah. Now anything that I read about women's sexuality in particular, I like who wrote this? How many people did they study and what definition of sex are they working with?
The societal harm by some of this language is so deep. Like I give lectures to doctors now and I tell them, do not ask your patients if they're sexually active. Because that means often, are you having a penis in your vagina? And many young women will say no if they're having oral sex, whatever, and they might not get educated on STIs, on health. So it's just, yeah, it's causing medical, psychological, sexual harm.
Yeah. And it continues.
And you might want to edit this out. I would say it's about to get worse again. I've been thinking a lot about how reproductive health is also related to sexual health. It's about women's knowledge, women's bodily autonomy, women's own decision making.
Yeah.
The same root causes of the orgasm gap, an overvaluing of male sexual pleasure related to the patriarchy, is the same root cause of taking our reproductive rights away. So sorry about if you want to edit that out.
As a public radio journalist, right, I'm not supposed to state my politics publicly. But as
Right.
I also tell people, abortion is not a political issue, it's a politicized issue. It is a medical procedure that is a politicized issue, and we
Yeah.
don't make that distinction often enough in general.
Thank you. I'm glad I said
Oh,
it so I could learn that from you. Yes.
speaking of terminology, so another thing in writing a lot about sex abuse and stuff, like child pornography is a term that's not used anymore because porn is not in and of itself criminal, or it's not in and of itself illegal.
Mhm.
As a child, you cannot work. Even if you wanted to, you cannot work legally. So it's CSAM, child sexual assault material.
Yes. Very good language shift. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me. I have a porn star come speak to my class. She's a full-fledged adult. She's chosen this work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever talk to gynecologists about how to talk to when you said something, don't ask them if they're sexually active. I remember asking this of my former gynecologist and then friends of friends who are gynecologists. And I've asked them, have you ever asked a patient if they've been sexually assaulted? Because statistically speaking, we all know someone, a woman who's been sexually assaulted, and probably a man. But statistically speaking, the number is very, very high. Have you ever asked them if they've been assaulted? Do you ask them, are you enjoying your sex life? Do you ever talk to gynecologists and kind of help them?
Yeah, I do grand rounds for many medical schools. I really love educating physicians because they do not get sexual health training. And many are therefore don't ask. And I do ask their patients, and I do advocate in my talk, put it in your screening questionnaire. Like, put in your screening questionnaire, do you have any sexual concerns with orgasm, desire, arousal, pain? Just like you'd ask, you fill out paperwork when you go to any doctor that's relevant to that specialty.
Even when it isn't. I've still filled out things like, have you felt dizzy or nauseous? Where that's not
Yeah.
what I'm going for. And that's, if I were, I don't even know if that doctor would have been able to help me or just refer me to someone else.
Yeah, I just went to an orthopedic person and I had to fill out something like from my head to my toes, even though I was going for my elbow, how's
Right.
my sleep? Am I dizzy? Do I have chest pains? Like, yeah, exactly.
One thing that unites people who want to talk about these issues, who want to talk about sex and sexuality and dildos and who have vulva puppets or who have like penis puppets or whatever it is that they're working with, is a lack of embarrassment and an
Mhm.
abundance of humor. And I'm sure your students really, and I mean everybody that you talk to appreciates both of those. Has there ever been a time when you were embarrassed by something maybe your students asked you about or put you on the spot about?
Never. I think I was like meant to do this work because I credit my now deceased mother. She was so ahead of her time, and she was so funny, and she was also funny about sex, but she was also so comfortable and serious about sex. I will just tell you this story because I absolutely love it. And it's a true story. My mother told me, don't go in your father's nightstand drawer. Okay, well, that's an invitation to go. I think I was like 9, somewhere between 9 and 13. I have no idea. And of course, I went in there and I found condoms. And I don't know how I knew what they were, but I certainly did. And I thought, oh, this is so interesting. And so every day I snuck back to the drawer for a week and counted them to see if any were missing. And then, of course, my guilt got the better of me, and one day my mom was cooking dinner, and I said, "I, like, need to talk to you." She's like, "I got things on the stove." I'm like, "No, this is really important." She sits down, and I said, "Mom, I did something really bad. I've been going to the nightstand drawer every night, and I've been counting Dad's condoms." And she barely missed a beat, and she said, "Did I have a good week?" And I said, "I don't know. There were 2 missing." She goes, "Pretty good. Stay out of the drawer. And do you have any questions about sex?" It was just like, I remember another time I was pleasuring myself, but then I heard it was bad, so I interrupted her very private bath time. And we weren't supposed to interrupt that. And I was like, "I have to talk to you." She's like, "I'm taking my bath." I'm like, "It's urgent." She's like, "Come in." I'll never forget. She's like laying there, she's this big breasted woman with this little washcloth over her boobs, just laying there all comfortable with her body. And she goes, "What's so important that you're interrupting my bath?" And I said, well, I've been touching myself down there. And she goes, oh my gosh, that's not important enough to interrupt my bath. Everyone does that. Just make sure your door's closed. Now go away.
So she taught you that it was normal and that it was
Yeah,
fun.
exactly.
The fact that she asked, did I have a good week, is brilliant, because the first thing is just not to shame you, not even to reprimand you about doing something she said not to. Immediately, that's equated.
Right, right. So I've never been embarrassed. There have been questions I don't know the answer to because there's so much about sex, even a sex expert, theoretically, like me, doesn't know because there's still so much unknown. So there's been a lot of questions I've had to say, that's a brilliant question. I have no idea. Let me do some digging, but I've never been embarrassed.
I had to ask, but
That's a great question. I gotta say, that's the first time anyone's ever asked me that question, and I love that question.
oh, I'm glad. If they ask you something you don't know, then you're learning from your students.
Absolutely. I've learned so much from my students. And the saddest thing I think I've learned from them is the topic of our conversation, how deeply, deeply wounded and injured they are by the false messages they've been fed.
Yeah,
How much unlearning there is to be done by the time they get to college.
they're just so young, and already these things are so deeply ingrained.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, I know you have to go.
I have to say, I've so enjoyed this conversation. I could talk to you for hours. I didn't feel like I was being interviewed. I felt like, oh, I want to be friends with her. This is like, she's so smart and she's got such good ideas and asking such good questions. This was just absolutely delightful.
Likewise, and if I make it down to Florida anytime soon, let's have coffee.
This was delightful, and you were so delightful to talk to. If there are things that we didn't get to, I'm really happy to schedule another call.
I may very well take you up on that.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you're doing this project. I'm sure it will have a huge impact, and thanks for including me.
Even if I'm not religious, from your mouth to God's ears.
Well, that's what my mother used to say. There you go.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your work and for the massive impact that you've been having for years now.
Oh, thank you for saying that. That means a lot.
That was Dr. Laurie Mintz, a new friend, as well as a professor, speaker, therapist, and author of 2 popular books on female sexuality, including the one we discussed and that I highly recommend, Becoming Cliterate: Why Orgasm Equality Matters and How to Get It. You can find links to her site, TEDx Talk, and socials on the episodes page of womenlikesex.com, episode 2. Women Like Sex is a flipped script production. It is executive produced and edited by me, Natasha Signanovic. Website design and artwork is by Ted Nunes. Edesio Martinez is associate producer. Vic Vinayak assisted on mixing and editing. For more episodes and swag, or to subscribe to the podcast or Patreon, please visit womenlikesex.com, the Women Like Sex YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is Women Like Sex. Pass it on.